Hello and welcome to our first day on solving inequalities here in Unit 2 of Algebra 1. We're going to talk a little bit about how to deal with the arrows and also how to deal with a little bit of the graphing part. We've been doing a lot of work so far with equations, so that should come in real handy working through these. Now as we start to talk about inequalities, we all know it's the ones with the arrow, but what does that actually mean? So for instance, if x is less than 5, now, that's something we might want to talk about a little bit before we even get started. When you have x, okay, and you have an arrow pointing at it, or you even have your x on the other side and the arrow is pointing at it, this is less than, because we're always talking about things in regards to x. Opposite of that, if your arrow is eating the x, and again, the x can be on either side. Notice the arrow can move with it. That's greater than. And we'll talk about how this affects our graph here in a little bit. But we have to have that as a foundation or a basis. So when I look at this, if x is less than 5, then x could be 4, it could be 3, it could be 2, and that kind of goes on and on. So when I go to graph my line, I always want to get my number that I have in the inequality. I like to put that in the middle, the number along each edge. So when I think about this for a minute, if I start at 5, if I want numbers that are less than 5, do I want my numbers coming to the left or do I want them going to the right? Well, if I want them less, I want values that are going to the left. And the other thing that I want to take note of is I have to be able to signify whether I want this number included or not. Well, this says x is less than 5. It doesn't say equals. So to signify that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, we're going to use an open circle. So open circle going to the left shows me all of my values of 5 this could be. It could be 4, and if I kept going, it would be 3 and 2 and 1 and so on. And this works for every problem with these. If x is greater than -3. To make my little graph, I put one value that's up 1 and one that's down 1. Well, if x is greater than -3, it could be -2, -1, it could be 0, and it could be any other positive number besides that. Well, greater than means I want to be having my arrow go to the right, because if I want to go the direction where -2 and -1 and 0 are, that's the right. And again, if x is greater than -3, so I don't want -3 included, so I'll put a big open circle there. And finally, for our examples up top, if x is greater than or equal to, that's what the line underneath means, -10, could be -10, or -9, or -8. Think about it like money. The less you owe somebody, the greater value it has. Start in the middle with -10 and get my numbers around the edges. I look at this and I say, okay, greater than or equal to. So since it can equal it as well, I'm going to close the dot in. And which direction is greater than? Where are these values going to be found on my number line? Well, it looks like this way. It heads toward the -9 part. So when you're graphing, I've given you a few clues. I guess I should have said a few. When the arrow eats x, okay, that's greater than, my arrow is going to go to the right. Greater than goes to the right. Greater than goes to the right. When the arrow points at x, which is less than, my arrow goes to the left. Less than, arrow is going to the left. If the arrow has no line under it, use an open dot. That's just greater or less than. If the arrow has a line under it, okay, use a closed dot, which I had not get written in there. So we've got that written in. So now let's actually do some of these with that in mind. So as I bring this up a bit, Show on the number line all possible values for x. Well, I always want at least 3 points on my line. My number in the problem goes in the middle, and one that's less than that number, so 3 minus 1 would be 2, and one greater, 3 plus 1 would be 4. So when I go to graph it, let's think about our clues. X is greater than 3. So greater than. Which numbers are getting bigger? The one's going to the right. Okay. So when the arrow eats, my X, my arrow goes to the right. So is this going to be an open or a closed dot? Open. No line under. You get an open dot, and we're good on that one. Okay, -2. Now again, think money. If I pay my friend back $1, how much do I owe him now? I only owe him $1. What if I borrow another $1? Because that's going to the left. Now I owe him 3. And again, I say, okay, it's going to be an open dot. There's no line underneath. Less than, X is less than -2. Less than goes to the left. And that'll be the same on all of these. If you get a fraction, don't fret. Okay, think of it this way. -3, I paid it back, it'd be a -2. I go the other way. I keep the number on the bottom, the denominator the same, and I just change the numerator. So now what am I going to do? I'm going to have a closed dot, because it's or equal to, and greater than goes which way? To the right. Just keep your graphing clues handy, and we should have life being pretty easy on you. Well, what if they're not ready right away? What if we get down here, and we start saying, oh, got to start figuring this stuff out now? Yep. We're still going to, just like before, we are attempting to solve for the x value. So what do? Well, how do I get rid of the -5? I plus it. Once I have x by itself, maybe my 3 lines, my answer goes in the middle. If I had one less, that goes to the left. If I had one greater, it goes to the right. Then we say, okay, let's see. Closed dot. X is being pointed at, which is less than goes to the left. I'm done. So now you start to see where all this equation solving comes in handy. Here, ooh, I have a fraction. How do we get rid of the fraction? Yep, multiply by 3. Cancels that out. What's my last step when I'm multiplying by 2? The opposite is divide. And again, once I get to the solution, that number goes in the middle, one less to the left, one greater to the right. Line underneath, close. X is greater than or equal to. Greater than means we're going to the right, where the bigger values are at. Okay. Take a look at 10, then we're going to bounce down to the bottom here. Same thing. Want to get 2x alone. How do I get the +7 out of it? Well, I minus it. And then since I'm multiplying x by 2, what's the opposite of that? Well, I can kind of look at number 9 if I wanted to cheat. That's not cheating, it's just being resourceful. Okay, so once I get my answer, what 3 numbers are going to go on the number line that I'm going to use here? Hopefully you said 7 in the middle, 1 less is 6, 1 greater is 8. Open or close circle here, since there's no line underneath, it's open. And the x is being pointed at, that's less than. Less than goes to the left. So then we start to pick it up a little bit. Number 12. I have like terms to put together. So I can. I don't have to do opposites. They're not on opposite sides of the arrow. So 8 minus 5 is 3x. Now this looks kind of normal. Work on getting my x alone. Do the opposite of adding 2, which is to subtract 2. Do the opposite of multiplying by 3. Divide by 3. Again, if we get going a little bit quick on this video, ask Mrs. O to put it on pause for a second. Then we can always get caught back up here. We can even rewind me if you want to hear me over and over again. All right. 8 in the middle. 1 less, 1 more. Open circle, because there's no line underneath. And less than goes to the left. Okay? All right. Let's flip you over here. Now, that is actually, I want to do one more. Sorry if that got a little crazy for a minute. I want to do this last one on 13. It's kind of like our note sheet. So we're looking at this and we're saying, okay, I know I got a minus 0.4. 1.2x is greater than 0.6. What's my last step since I'm multiplying by 1.2? Let's divide by 1.2. So you punch that in the calculator, don't panic. 0.5. So you're like, how the heck do I do that? Well, 0.5 goes in the middle, but what goes on the edges? Well, there's a couple of things I could do. I could look at this like this was regular 5, and do 0.4 and 0.6. If some of you have had other classes and you thought, well, can I do 0 and then 1? Sure, you absolutely could. Open circle. Greater than goes to the right. Now we're ready to flip over. So again, this was kind of like our examples and notes. I know I left you a couple to do, but that's not bad. And then when you flip over to the back, we've got a couple of things going on here. We're going to do a zoom out here for a second. I'll put this back momentarily, but I wanted you to notice down to the bottom, you write your inequality, you solve it, and then you can find the graph over here, just as some practice. You don't have to do the puzzle, Dan, but I'd like to know what letter matches with your graph. So, let me get focused back in here so we can get back with the program. You're like, well, wait a minute. The first one's not even an inequality. Mr. H, I just got to divide by 5, and I've got the answer. But how am I supposed to get a graph of that? I don't get it. You'll notice on your graph there's just a dot on one of the numbers. So if you go down along this side, and I shouldn't have to go too far here to find it, notice here on letter N, there's just a dot on -3. So this one's going to be N. And that's all I'm wanting you to do on these. Okay, let's come down to number 5. So we'll go right below it here. My x's this time are on opposite sides. So I have to do an opposite to get them together. If they're on the same side, I can just put them together. But in this case, that doesn't quite work out. So now we got our x's together. Now we want to get them alone. So how do I get the minus 13 out of there? I'm going to plus it. My last step is to divide by 4. And here's where I have to be careful. I may have to flip my sheet back over for this one. This says x is greater than or equal to 0. Don't get suckered into thinking the arrow always matches the arrow on your graph. It doesn't. Greater than means my arrow is going to go to the right. So I need to find the one with 0. Is my dot going to be open or closed? Right, it's going to be closed. So I'm looking for something with a 0 that's going to the right. And there it is. Dot on 0 going to the right looks like an F. So I put S. Your job is to finish off this half of the sheet, and there's a couple of examples on the other side. If you're having some issues, talk to Mrs. O. You need to check this later, do that. Have a terrific day and a wonderful long weekend.